Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Rivlin, glad to see you. In 2014, you gave testimony in front of the House Committee on Financial Services, and you said the following, that the right policy to address the debt would be to slow the growth of the health care entitlements, get Social Security into long-run balance, reform the tax system to produce more revenue by broadening the base and lowering the rates, and cap the growth of discretionary spending. Do you still believe those four principles are key to addressing and eventually lowering the debt?
Yes.
I think, just for the record, that's what we've been trying to do for the last year. I will say, though, on the discretionary side, we're not doing very well. Dr. Holtz-Eakin, good to see you.
Good to see you.
I been working on the regulatory side of things, and we've seen estimates as high as $1.9 trillion in terms of what overregulation is costing the economy. In the last 18 months, we've done quite a bit to get rid of the obsolete, the redundant, the contradictory regulations. Has anyone taken a look at how regulatory reform impacts economic growth and given any projections on how it will impact federal revenue?
I haven't seen those estimates. I would concur that there's been an enormous change in the regulatory burden and the growth of the regulatory burden in particular. I have to believe that directionally it's going to improve the overall performance of the macroeconomy, but that's an area where the research literature provides very little guidance as to the actual magnitudes.
Is there any way to include that in estimates for the impact on the economy and particularly on revenue? Are we just going to have to learn by doing, or?
I believe there are ways. I've thought about this problem a lot. There are none that are easy and that are to the sort of degree of maturity that you could just, like between now and a month from now, have some estimates of the impact. There's a lot of work that needs to be done.
Before I had to run out, I tried to jot down what you said, but you said something about mission creep for CBO and certain things being outside their ability to project. One of my frustrations has been the CBO's projections on the benefit of repealing the ban on exporting crude oil. Their projections for, in terms of revenue generation, have been, I think, incredibly low. Are those type things, including the estimates on the impact of regulatory reform, are those outside the ability of the CBO?
Well, CBO certainly has no portfolio on regulatory issues. That's one that's been suggested in the past, and I've always been concerned about that. I mean, that's an enormous undertaking. CBO certainly could not undertake it with its current staffing, and I've always been worried that you would turn a premier budget shop into a less than premier budget plus regulatory shop, and that would be a step in the wrong direction. Have a good regulatory analysis shop if that's what the Congress needs.
Well, my point on this is that in trying to deal with the deficit and the debt, it's not just reducing spending, it's increasing revenues. And I try not to be too hard on the CBO, because I've, in my years with the think tank, worked with the CBO on other things. But there's got to be better information, in my opinion, that comes out that takes into account these improvements in the economy, because we've got to do this with revenue growth and with spending cuts. In that regard, Dr. Rivlin, I want to go back to something you said earlier about the way the CBO assumes growth when it creates its baseline, evaluates changes to programs and incentivizes further spending. Even when a program spends more than it did in the previous year, any change to that program results in less spending, then the CBO projects that it's a cut. And I don't quite understand that, because, for instance, on Medicaid expansion, when we, in our bill that we passed last year, froze Medicaid expansion, everybody's running around saying we're cutting Medicaid, which, frankly, that's not a cut. When we were talking about requiring able-bodied adults without dependent children to work, they were yelling, that's a cut, that's not a cut. Would you comment on that?
Yes, this has been a controversy over terminology for a long time, but I would submit you do need a baseline. You do need to ask the question, if we make this change, how will it change the budget from what would otherwise have happened? Now, you can find another word than cut, but you do need to know what the impact on the budget of changing a law is, and compared to what would otherwise have happened under existing law. That's just a useful thing to know. And you can change the terminology, but you need to know that.
If the chairman will indulge me just for a minute, on that point, I agree with where you're going with that, but I think the key is that if we're spending, we're obligated to spend a certain amount of money, and we don't spend that, that's a cut. But if it's an open-ended deal where it depends on how many people sign up, I don't think that's a cut. And I think, Dr. Holtz-Eakin, if you'd respond, and I'll yield back.
So
All right.
you need a baseline, and the method by which the baseline is created, the rules that are followed in doing that projection are laid out in the Budget Act. And the CBO, in consultation with the budget committees, and fulfills its mandate to prepare the baseline. If you don't like the appearance, what you're really saying is, I don't like that baseline. And you ought to think about looking at the Budget Act and deciding if there's a better baseline preparation.